story. Genna, welcome to the Better World Leaders podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Could you please repeat your surname for me?
Sure, it's Onuchukwu, so Genna Onuchukwu.
Genna Onuchukwu, thank you for coming and spending some time with us today. I was so ready to say that.
So
Just
fun.
completely went out of my head. So we've been having so many fascinating conversations, and I'm so glad that we can create one now that we can share with the world. And we were introduced relatively recently. It's the first time that we're meeting, fortunately, now in person. So here we are. What I'd really like to explore with you is probably three things. Your personal journey, which is so fascinating, and these specific moments of calling that you had pretty early on, and then really sort of what you've done and the insight and the perspectives that you've gained through what you've done, and then just a little bit about where you're at right now and what lies ahead of you.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Let's do it.
Okay, so first of all, just sort of give us a little bit of your background, your sort of origin story. Where have you come from to get here today?
Okay, so in a nutshell, I am born Australian in Sydney, New South Wales. I'm one of 4 girls. I've been raised very fortunately in the Eastern Suburbs, private school education my entire life. I've just come from a lot of privilege, let's put it that way. And in high school, in my later years, I always used to see the disparity between my lifestyle and then the World Vision ads you see Christmas time, with children who are starving or haven't been to school. And this used to have this impact on me. I'd look in, the 3-story mansion I was living in and be like, why am I the same age as this person? And I have all these things. And then I see kids exactly the same age as me on the other side of the world who have nothing.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's where my journey of the humanitarian work that I do stemmed from, because I never turned a blind eye. I'm very curious, and if something bothers me or if I find something's unjust, I kind of get like a little fiery burn in my gut, and I have to act and do something about it.
Perfect, great. Okay, we're going to get to what some of those things have been, but you had this particular experience when you were wanting to follow or sort of, I suppose, build that flame of impetus and action, and you went and sort of approached some of the sort of, one would say, obvious places to show up and say, hey, I'm here to help, let's do this, and you didn't get the response that you were expecting, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I approached some of the larger organisations like Oxfam and World Vision. I was like, look, I'm an 18, 19-year-old girl, I've got an interest in this, can I volunteer with you? And the response was, sorry, you're too young and inexperienced. And to be honest, that really pissed me off. It's like, how dare you deprive me of opportunity to help and have the opportunity to grow just because I haven't had experience. You're never going to have experience unless somebody gives you that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I thought, screw you guys, I'm going to do it myself. And that's what I did. So I started Generosity Abroad, which is an Australian registered charity with ACNC, and we support women and children in Kenya at the moment. We have 2 projects that I started myself, Krunga's Emmanuel Kindergarten and a women's training centre, and I also support an orphanage and a maternity clinic.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that's all stemmed from the idea of, instead of saying to somebody else, you can dictate to me what I'm going to do with my life, I'm going to take control, and I'm going to work with people on the ground who I know personally and can make a direct impact with. Whereas if I was actually accepted to volunteer, I probably wouldn't have had a voice, and I would have been on the ground to make the decisions that I make now. So I've actually gained a lot more power and influence within the communities to make sure I do what's best for them and not just get lost in a larger organisation and have no voice.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I won't go into the detail, but I've had dissimilar but comparable experience being on the ground in some of these parts of the world where people are living in a very, very different way to we are, working with locally led, locally managed, for good, for purpose organisations. And you rock up with 0 skills, but a lot of intention. And what I've received, and I'd be really interested in your comparison with this, is just open arms, and we're so grateful you're here, and what would you like to do? Rather than, yeah, look, you don't really bring much to the table, or you need all these skills. And I think this for me is a great frustration because of the missed contribution that a lot of people would be really grateful in their own lives for making. So what was your experience when you rocked up in these places essentially saying, hi, I'm Genna, I'm here to help?
Initially, I started with a volunteering program through Intrepid, which was linked with another organisation called Mad Venture, which is from the UK.
Yep.
And I did a 2-week volunteering program and I loved it so much. I said to my mum, please, I was 18, I'd just finished high school in 2009. I was like, please, can I stay for another month and continue volunteering? My mum's like, no, come home, save up, go back. And that's what I did. I lived in Kenya for 6 months when I was 19. And I had formed relationships with people. And what I love about my journey is I've failed and I've fucked up and I've learned along the way. I had no skills apart from what I've learned in high school. I ended up doing a nursing degree from 2011 to 2013. And even though Generosity Abroad was established in 2010, I realized that I had good intentions, but that's not always good enough. You need to have skills and qualifications. So then I completed a second degree in International Aid and Development and Sustainable Development. And what I've learned along the way is when I went into these communities, I had already established a rapport with them because I knew them personally. And I could see like, okay, these are some of the issues, but I never said to them, this is what you need. I always had them tell me what their problems were and what solutions they could come up with, and I helped them execute it. Mm-hmm. So what I've learned is to never put my values onto somebody else, because where I come from, they don't have the same way of executing it in their countries. And I'll give you an example of that. When I started my women's training centre, the original plan was, okay, I'm going to provide you with a free year of education. And in return, following years, you're going to come volunteer, even if it's for a couple of hours each week, to then pass that forward on to future generations. Now, where we come from, that would be easy for us to do, right? Not a problem. We've got a few spare hours. I'll do that. In reality, with communities which are living in poverty, they do not have that ability to dedicate their time because they need to go work to be able to support their children. So I learned along the way, it's like, I can't expect them to do what I had initially thought. I need to rearrange and readapt the model that I was implementing to then actually fit in with their culture and lifestyle and values and morals.
Yeah. And some of the outcomes you found since you made that or you had that realization and then you made that shift, have you seen a difference in the outcomes?
Yeah, so what it is now is that we still provide a free year of education, and we actually don't expect the women to come back. And I think that's the right thing to do. And we just keep taking new intake of students every year. And what we've seen is a lot of these women, and we've now, as of last year, opened it up to men as well. We have women and now men starting their own businesses, leaving their villages to actually create income, be able to send their children to school, and it stops the poverty cycle. Yeah. And I say the same thing is with our cohorts when we were at school. Not everybody's going to excel and be able to do that, but they're still able to make changes to their livelihoods to be able to support themselves and their families. And that's all we care about. We don't actually measure the impact because every family is different. Yeah. There's this, I'm not sure if you'd be aware of this guy, there's this fascinating author, I'm going to stuff his name up as well, I think it's Enfasa Njoku, who's written a book called Prosperity Paradox. And I've been in dialogue with him, and hopefully we're going to have him on the show at some point next year. But his whole thing is essentially, I think, a reflection of what you're saying, is it's really about empowerment and enablement. And he talks about primarily, he comes from sub-Saharan Africa, and he's primarily focused on the African continent. But essentially he's saying we need to think about enabling prosperity, not just providing basic stuff. Yeah. And it's the whole fishing rod fish thing, but that very much seems to be reflected in your experience as well. Yeah, that's absolutely our approach. You give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Yeah. And that's something that we definitely, that's our mantra, I suppose. But we also are very focused on any of the community work. It has to be run by the community for the community. Yeah. They have to participate in all of the decision-making processes. Even though I'm the one facilitating it, I don't like to take credit for it. So I only want to be the one that's enabling it to happen, but they're the ones who have to put in the hard work, because if they don't put in the hard work, they're not going to appreciate it, and it's not going to maximize the outcomes and outputs that we would have as our goals. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's what we're focused on mainly, is the community and putting them at work. And it's so interesting because I'm having this internal dialogue listening to you describe that.
reflecting on some of the conversations that we've had around parenting.
Yes.
If I may share that you're a recent parent, congrats.
Thank you.
But also another conversation that we had here on Better World Leaders with a very inspiring woman just like yourself, except that she jumps out of planes to create inspiration. And when she was talking about essentially how do you create these really high performance teams, essentially what it comes down to for her is it's up to the key leaders in the teams to facilitate the environment for success. Right? And that's what we've been talking about in terms of parenting. Like, your role as a parent is to facilitate the environment for your child to thrive.
Absolutely.
That's what you're doing with these communities. You're providing some means, you're providing some resources, but those are only to enable this and facilitate the environment for them to then do what they know they need to do to create prosperity.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the biggest dangers in the roles of humanitarian work is walking into a community and automatically having power because I'm white.
Sure.
Especially in a black community, and that's actually what happens, and people give me too much power and I never exploit it. I'm very mindful of that. And the reason for that is I should never be able to walk into a community and say, this is how you need to live your life, because I know better. I don't. And I think a lot of people actually do that, which is a white savior type of approach. And most of the times it's quite innocent. People don't mean to. And I'm guilty of that when I first started. But I made sure that I was mindful of it, and I've not continued to do that. You know, and that, I mean, people fail to understand that. I go, okay, my background's Jewish. I'm not religious myself, but my background's Jewish. And I have to say to some of the people in the community, how would you feel if an outsider came into our community and said, you're not allowed to live your life this way. You're not allowed to follow these traditions. You have to change because you're doing it incorrectly and my way is the right way. We would not tolerate that. So why, as an outsider, am I allowed to walk into any other community which is impoverished and say, I know what's best? We shouldn't be allowed to.
I think there's a couple of things in there that I would say I would try and sort of encapsulate in humility and respect. I mean, what you are bringing is, maybe some knowledge, maybe some skills, potentially, means and resources. But if you then also bring those things in, but sort of partition them under the umbrellas, the joint umbrellas of humility and respect, it's a very different, ultimately outcome, but it's very different engagement, right?
Yeah. And that's what I strive for. I always want to uphold dignity and respect for anybody who I deal with. And that means making sure the way that I approach these people, I don't trust just the one person who I speak to. I do a lot of research and speak to a lot of community members and make sure I hear everybody's voice, because you have leaders in their communities who are dishonest, who are corrupt, who are greedy. And if they're the only people who I deal with, then I'm not actually getting to hear the people who I'm trying to help on the lower levels.
Yeah. And there's another point that you made in the preparation that we were having for this about disagreement, and that is something that essentially people need to be comfortable with. And it shouldn't always be this pursuit of harmony in effect.
There's no such thing. Absolutely. I mean, even today, I think everybody's really polarized with their viewpoints. And if you don't agree 100% with me, we can't be friends, or I can't work with you. And I just think that's crazy. Even in examples of my husband's a Nigerian Catholic man, and I'm a white Australian woman. And a lot of the things we don't see eye to eye, but I love and respect that he has different views to me. And he's the same. He doesn't shove down his opinions down my throat. And I appreciate that. If he wants to raise our daughter Catholic, by all means, you go to church on a Sunday morning. I'm going to have the morning off and enjoy myself. It's a win-win. But I don't have to change my lifestyle just because I don't agree with you. And I think we need to be more accepting that people can have differences of opinions and still respect one another and come to an agreement of whatever it is that you're trying to work through or work on.
And I think I would sort of contend and take that to another level and say there is some artistry in managing and sort of moderating how that disagreement kind of resonates and comes together. But it's actually a good thing. Right, if we put it under another umbrella of diversity, you could say diversity encourages resilience, diversity encourages creativity, diversity encourages more effective problem solving, more sustainable outcomes, like all of these things. But because we're so polarized, and because there's an inherent discomfort in sitting with somebody who really vehemently disagrees with your own belief system, perspectives, lived experience, I think we're kind of reluctant to sort of stay with them and then look for, okay, well, you know, what's the upside of combining these very different perspectives from the perspective of diversity and all of the good stuff that flows from that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. So, I mean, do you have you've had such, I think, fascinating insights, at a relatively young age to, sort of direct impact of leadership in these different communities and contrasting, sort of perspectives. Would you sort of be able to say, have you distilled any specific do's and don't do's for leaders that are trying to, sort of strive to, sort of improve things at a community level or a country level or, whichever?
For me personally, I think something that's really important for leadership is when we hear the word leadership, we think of it as somebody who's above or in front of, and I don't necessarily agree with that being the only form of leadership.
No, sure.
I think leadership needs to come where you might lead by example, but you want to pull people up to your level. Yeah. And I often see, and we had this discussion before, you might see people who have titles that they're in a leadership position, but they don't actually have the leadership skills. And I think if people are looking at turning to leadership, what are your strengths? What are you good at, and excel in that? Don't worry about your weaknesses. Don't waste your time on that. Focus in areas where you excel in, and that's where you're going to grow. And I think for me, naturally, that's what I've done. I've never cared about what people think. And even if I did, that's their problem, not mine. A lot of people disagreed that I was a young, white Australian girl traveling to Africa by myself. I'm like, that's your problem. Why is that going to stop me from doing what I want to do? I was carjacked at gunpoint on my 3rd trip.
Wow.
And I was lucky I wasn't raped or murdered. And I still went back another 7 times after that. And people are like, why would you go back? I go, the people who carjacked me at gunpoint don't know about the work that I'm doing. And even if they did, that's their survival. Why will I allow other people to dictate to me how I should live my life? And I think that's the thing, it's that resilience of you've got to keep going. You're going to come to hurdles. You've got to be able to overcome them. And failure is something to embrace. For some reason in our society, failing is such a bad thing. If you're not failing, you're not trying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You've got to try.
Yeah.
And who cares? You fall off the horse, you get back on it. So for anybody who's wanting to start out in leadership, what are areas of your interest? Connect with people who you have those common interests with, and naturally your network will become to flourish, and you'll be able to meet like-minded people, and you will naturally go on a journey heading towards whatever it is that is for you.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I was obsessed with Africa. I made a point of meeting up with African Australians, networking, finding out about their stories, being able to talk about my experiences, and that just kept on snowballing until now that I've got networks everywhere across all different countries in Africa, because that's what my passion is. And I continue to involve myself, go to events, do charity talks or guest speaking, whatever it might be. And yeah, that's what I believe. Start with your strengths.
That's. I mean, there's a heck of a lot in there. Thank you for that. Try and sort of replay that and tease some of the key things out so we can explore them further. I'm just going to put a flag up for us that I just don't want to forget. I want to ask you a specific question about sort of comparative leadership approaches that you've seen in Africa, and what maybe the audience for this, which is typically more, sort of Western or certainly non-African at this point in time, might take from that. So we'll come back to that.
Sure.
But in what you just said, I think there's a few things. You are absolutely a doer.
Yes.
Right? You are a get stuff done person.
Yeah.
And that in of itself for me is an indicator of leadership.
Yeah,
Because
it's true.
Part of my sort of philosophy of leadership is that leadership is about doing, right? Which is essentially to say that leadership is a set of behaviours, right? Leadership's not a status. It's not a sort of an authority that you are granted to then take control or be prescriptive. Leadership's about how you show up every day and what you do when you do.
Yeah.
And I think fundamentally, almost at a sort of a societal and systems level, that's a comparison for me with Europe, where I grew up, with Australia, where America, where everything's in a hierarchy, and we're always looking at a point in the hierarchy and sort of saying, well, they are because they're there, rather than saying, well, based on what that person is doing, they are, right? And that's one observation I've made, in Latin and South America, which is primarily where I've had sort of my, volunteering experience, is that, views on leadership, especially at a community level, it's all about outcome, it's all about action.
So I've been a part of a mums group in Bondi with my 4-month-old daughter, and we only had 8 mums, and somebody told me about this app called Peanut, and that's like Tinder but for mums and bubs, which is awesome. So you can create a profile and be able to meet like-minded women and meet up with them, so you've got some more support, especially during this COVID time. That's really important. So one of the other mums and I in my group, we ended up chatting to all these women, and we created our own group, and now every week we're organising different catch-ups for women to come. Now that took 0 effort to say, hey, do you want to come meet at the park at this time next Tuesday?
Yeah.
That it's something so simple, and exactly what you're saying, you do. If you have an idea, just execute it. It doesn't have to be difficult. You don't have to have financial resources behind you. You just have to have that motivation and dedication to want to do something and make it happen.
Yeah, and I think the other perfect alignment that we have, that you shared in what you said before, was the whole failure thing. We talk about failure a lot here. We talk about failure a lot at 4i, and I think failure, or rather fear of failure, is for most people the reason they don't do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was not academic. I was going to drop out in high school and when I was in year 10, and my parents convinced me to stay until I finished year 12. And my attitude at that time was, first of all, I'm stupid and I'm dumb. I was just passing. Why am I wasting my time and your money? But actually those years I managed to get into all the leaderships, positions at school, and then I continued to do that throughout my university. And what I realized is that it's not always about the grades. Everything that I have been good at, I've never been graded on.
Isn't that telling?
We put so much pressure on our students. I'm a school nurse about getting good grades, and then what? They do not define you. And I say this to my students: if you have a monkey and a fish, and you say to the monkey, say who's better at climbing a fish? Let me start that again. If you have a monkey and a fish, you say who's better at climbing a tree? The monkey. If you have a monkey and a fish, who's better at swimming? A fish. We are all different. We all have our strengths. And instead of focusing on trying to compare ourselves to other people, if we just focus on ourselves, we're able to excel.
Yeah,
and you don't have to be graded on to be told you are worthy and you can do it.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with somebody just the other day, and they're a parent, they're an educator, but they're also in the leadership space overseas, and we were talking about a significant, they're from the subcontinent, and they were saying we have such a significant leadership deficit, and a big part of the reason for that potentially is that we don't think about leadership as a learnable set of behaviours that we embed in the education stream at the early stage, right? Not in the sort of the orthodox sort of academic space.
Yeah.
Maybe it's being done now, but it certainly wasn't being done in the 80s and 90s when I was at school. And I think, therefore, it's almost an incidental that you come into leadership roles in school, right? As you say, those are not things that you're graded on. Those are not things that if you're being orientated towards a specific outcome academically, you're necessarily going to invest time in, because it's not going to help your scores or maybe you might contend, that we know they'll help you get into uni, but is it just ticking the box? Or is it recognising that it's actually a really fundamental part of what enables you to go and be impactful and meaningful in the world?
Absolutely, but we're actually setting our children up to fail by saying this is the only thing that matters. Of the whole 12 years of your school, we only care about the grade, not about the skills that you've learnt along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, same with my nursing, right? I refuse to work in a hospital. It's not my area of interest. I'm very much community-based. And when I finished my nursing degree, there's something called a new grad year where you work in the hospital for a year and you transition from being a student to a full-time registered nurse. But there are only 2/3 of the nursing cohort each year that are able to go into those roles. But if you're only focusing on that 1/3, you're setting up failure for those 2/3 who do not meet that.
Yeah.
And then what? And then you look down on them because they're not able to be placed in a position, but there's not a position for everybody available. So I actually think our system and our the way that we look at life is actually a part of the contributing factor as to why people aren't focused more on their strengths and actually doing, because they're always told about what happens when they don't.
Yeah.
Rather than looking at what happens when they do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the most brutal manifestations of, again, to come back to this, I think, sort of emerging theme of the fear of failure is that you look at a lot of the really high achieving schools and universities, and there's this alarming correlation with they have the highest suicide rates.
Yeah, I see with my students, a lot of them have severe anxiety and depression. When they're used to being number one all the time and they drop for whatever reason, they can't cope.
Yeah.
Whether that's inflicted on themselves or that's external pressure from the parents or the teachers in the school or the community. When people feel like they're a failure, they kind of just give up. And that's a problem within itself. It's okay to fail. It's okay to not do well at everything. And so what? What is the worst outcome that's going to happen? And I think there needs to be more space for people to just fail and not, have that as a negative thing rather than more of a positive thing. Be like, great, good on you. Means you can try again next time.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely take it further and say, failure is a good thing. Failure is an entirely good thing. It teaches you so much, and particularly, when a lot of what I'm doing is looking at the future of work and future of leadership. If all you know how to do is memorize and hold information and then operate in a linear mode, reflecting on that information, effectively you're done. Like, you're cooked. Like, AI is coming, all of the jobs that rely on that skill set are going to get automated out. Whether that's in the legal profession, it's in the health sector, or it's in logistics, like all of these roles that we look at today, and we're like, thank goodness that exists. That's an essential service that people can still be employed in COVID. Let's repeat this pandemic in 20 years and see how many of those jobs are there, or even 5 or 10 years. Whereas failing teaches you to reflect and to be adaptable and to try something a different way, and it enables you to move into systems thinking and more sort of natural, intuitive thinking modes. Whereas if all you're told is that's the wrong way to do it this way, or let's not call that failure, let's not use that word, let's mollycoddle it up with some other softer terminology. It's just not again, it's not providing and setting kids up to succeed.
Absolutely. Even what you were saying before with failure, when you fail, you are able to adapt to so many different scenarios and you can grow with that. And what we were saying before with resilience, it makes you resilient. It means, okay, I've been pushed back, this isn't working, let's try something else. I've been listening to the book on Audible called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek.
Okay.
And it is amazing. My sister told me about it. I was like, okay, let me check it out. And something that they touch on is when CEOs change in a company, right, and they don't change with the times, they keep doing what they know is good, and it stops working because other elements have changed, but they keep doing the same thing, trying to make that fit, and it won't.
Yeah.
So sometimes you need to break that mold and start again.
Yeah. But you're in this perpetual feedback loop of, I have to hit the next quarterly return, I can't tell my investors, I don't know what the answers are. Yeah, I mean, I hope, that in this moment that we're in right now, we might see a shift in this, because I've seen a number of our clients, like big corporate organizations, essentially go to their investment communities with one of two messages. Either we are going to forecast, but no more than 12 weeks out. And we are going to run multiple budget and forecast cycles, because that's the only way we can give you any kind of credible information. Or they're simply saying, no, we are not even going to give you an indicative measure to score us against, because we have no idea what's happening and what that means for our business. And it's changing so quickly all the time. And in my lifetime, not that I have an infinite amount of experience, but I'm 40 in a few weeks. I've been working for over 20 years. That's the first time I've seen leaders at a senior level be prepared to come forward and say, we do not know, and we're going to figure it out.
That's exactly it. And that's what we don't do enough, especially in leadership roles. I think people are fearful to say, I don't know.
Absolutely.
And actually, I think the best leaders are the ones who say, I don't know, let's find out.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't need to know everything. And I think the people who are know-it-alls, that's when the walls come up and you don't have as much room to move. But when you let those walls come down, you've got a lot more freedom, a lot more flexibility, and then you can create a lot more. You're not restricted.
I had this brilliant conversation, or rather I should say, we had here this brilliant conversation with this fascinating guy, Andrew Haim-DeVries, who is the most dyslexic person I've ever encountered. Right, he can't read, he can't write. I basically had to interact with him through an intermediary to get him onto the podcast. And he has seen phenomenal success later in life doing this very intuitive pivot where he went from being a visual artist to inventing a composting system.
Awesome.
It's like this total, like 3
Love
times
that.
360, he's
Yes.
gone like round and round and round. But his insights on leadership were absolutely fascinating, and one of them in particular just exactly mirrors what you've just said, that essentially, to use Andrew's words, and apologies Andrew if I don't get this entirely right, but we have to profoundly own what we know and what we don't know.
100%.
And he had this beautiful phrase that is essentially the genesis of high-performing teams, when everyone in a team can sit there with, again, humility, respect, and say, right, I know quite a bit about that, absolutely nothing about this stuff. Then you've got the opportunity to create a diverse jigsaw, so you can put all that knows and don't knows together.
Yeah. And we don't do enough of that, to be honest. I mean, even in my role as the school nurse, I'm employed as a nurse. I know so much more than that. If they allow me, which they do, to tap into the other areas that I know, then I can help team up with other staff members. We are more than just what our title is. We are more than just our profession. You know, I've got a lot of different skill sets in different areas, and when I combine it, a lot of great things can happen, right? But if I'm only to say you can only use one skill, then we're actually saying to other people, you can't fully bring everything to the table and make this a better workplace environment or outcomes for the students.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to start to summarise, are there some specific things that you would recommend people do that are in leadership roles that want to start to do things better?
Yeah, just get out there and do it. Stop talking. I reckon networking and writing down what your strengths and interests are to begin with, and then go from there. I don't think anything else I can say, because unless you're prepared to do that very beginning step, nothing else is going to work.
Can I just give you one provocation based on something that you mentioned previously?
Go for it.
What about creating a pestle?
Oh, God, of course. Classic Pestle. Right. Pestle is the most amazing tool that I use all the time. It's called a pestle analysis. P is for political, E is for economic, S is for social, T is for technological, L is for legal, E is for environmental. And whatever it is that you're wanting to do, you write up a pestle analysis and you jot down as many points as you can. And that just gives you a workspace to see, like, okay, these are things that I know to address. These are some issues that we're going to have. And then maybe you can do a SWOT analysis after that. But that's going to put any idea you have on a piece of paper and look at all these internal and external factors that might influence whatever it is that you're wanting to do.
Look, there's been so much in there. We've covered a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time. If something that you've said has ignited a spark in someone and they're now just completely hyper curious about you, what's the easiest way for people to get involved with what you're doing and find out more about Genna?
So if anybody wants to learn more about the work that I do or the charity Generosity Abroad, please go to www.generosityabroad.org, and it's spelled GENNAROSITY.
We'll get it in the show notes.
Perfect. And feel free to flick me an email or my details there. Give me a call. My number's there as well. And I love talking to anyone who'll listen.
Okay. There you go. Standing offer to the entire world to give Genna a call.
Absolutely.
Just appreciate she's based in Sydney, Australia, so it'd be time zone appropriate with your calls, or maybe text in advance. All right, look, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. I'd love to have you back again. And something that we're going to start doing is welcoming guests back as we do our interseasonal specials to give an update on their progress and what they're up to. So maybe you can come back again and tell us some more about what you're doing.
In a heartbeat. I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me.
Beautiful. Thank you. You'll find audio and video recordings for this episode, as well as links and related resources mentioned today in the podcast area of 4iLeadership.com/insights. This is the Better World Leaders podcast, brought to you by 4i Leadership.